Ganesh Chish, and thank you, Ray and Vicky and Dino, for that presentation. I appreciate it. We have a cultural presentation by Donell Barlow, and she's going to talk about food is medicine. Donell is an enrolled member of Ottawa Tribe. Uh-oh.
I asked
Everybody
them.
please mute. Can everybody please
Hello?
mute? Thank you. So Donell graduated from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, where she received her certification in holistic health coaching. Ganesh Chish.
Why hasinu kokain isquis Donell Barlow. Kos sklehet keek and moot. Good day. My name is Donell Barlow. I live in Spokane, Washington. I want to acknowledge that we're on the ancestral lands of the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Kalispel, and Colville Confederated Tribes. I am an enrolled member of the Ottawa Tribe Otter Clan, and I am Yurok on my maternal side. I've been working as a holistic health coach for the past going on 9 years, really focusing on using food as medicine and working within Native communities, also alongside of federal grant programs, supporting elders and our Native youth. So this work is very near and dear to my heart. We don't have a whole lot of time today, but I'm really going to try to focus on some key things that I see get missed a lot of the times that we discuss food as medicine in particular. Before I get into some of the history of how our intimate relationship changed as Indigenous people with being able to utilize that medicine, I want to share a poem with you. I'm also an author of 4 different books. This next poem, before I go to the slide, I just want to prepare you, because for some people, it might trigger you a little bit, make you a little upset, because we do have a very special relationship to fry bread. And, no matter how we look at it, when it comes down to it, fry bread is not a traditional food. And while it is a food of comfort, while it is a food that we had to have access, we had no other choice but to have to utilize what we were given, it does perpetuate a lot of genocide in our Indigenous relatives. So you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. I'm going to read that to you now. Fry bread, white flour, oil, powdered milk, and lard. The key elements of a recipe that became a symbol of colonization. Ingredients chosen strategically to weaken Indigenous populations for generations to come. Embraced by what was available at the time with little resources to depend on. While being appealing and hearty, this food of oppression comes at a cost, having the highest diabetes in the nation, perpetuating the genocide of more Indigenous relatives. Now, I'm not shaming fry bread here. I love fry bread and I eat it on occasion. I have my grandparents definitely spent years perfecting their recipe, but it's really important for us to understand that this did come from colonization. And so if we have family members, if we have people around us in community, we need to also think about other traditional foods that we can start incorporating so that we can start promoting that food as medicine again and restoring that relationship to food. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So I'm not sure, I know I have a pretty vast audience here of people that are attending, but our relationship to food as Indigenous people was so vastly different from what it is today. It was very intimate. And that was really severed through the colonization, being stripped of our foodways, not being able to access our traditional foods, participate in ceremonies, using the language. And all of it's connected. They are not separate. So when you talk about culture, you're talking about all of those different parts. And so that's really why we're seeing these health disparities in Indian country, why we have the highest diabetes, why we're leading some of those numbers in heart disease, arthritis, and other chronic diseases, that these are all an impact of colonization. So this is a picture from a study that was done by Dr. Western Price. He was a dentist that documented some of the health of remote Indigenous communities all over the world during the 50s and 60s when they started incorporating processed foods into our diet. And what he noticed was that a huge significance in our health just through our teeth and our gums. So our bone structure began to narrow and our teeth began to crowd and we started getting cavities as we started introducing some of these processed foods. He also came to understand that Indigenous diets have 10 times more fat-soluble vitamins A and D, which is really important because that helps us absorb more vital nutrients into our bodies. So our ancestors, they knew that. We didn't have to know these are specific vitamins and minerals that we're getting from these foods and that's why we're eating them. We utilized every part of the animal, and that was passed on from generation to generation. We didn't have to have the scientific data to back that up. And so they were getting all of the things that they needed to stay healthy and to continue to survive. There was no sugar other than found in food naturally, also no processed food. And then taking the time to forage, hunt, and grow and prepare cooked meals. So that's really what I mean about also intimate relationship to food that we've lost as a nation. We don't have that anymore because it was severed from us. We have processed food. We're all about the convenience of food. I do think COVID has changed some of that for us in a positive way, that we're starting to get back to understanding really what goes into that, and that there's a process to that. And when you're out and when I'm particularly foraging food, it begins with the intention that I have when I go out to forage that food. Because as we understand as Indigenous people, that energy goes into that entire process. And my family and my community, they're going to be absorbing that energy, and that began with me. So when I go out and I'm foraging plants or traditional foods, I have to do it in a good way. And that includes the energy I'm bringing in, and then also offering some type of reciprocity, because it makes the plant medicine stronger. And then that continues through the way that I prepare it for the people that I'm giving it to. And then utilizing that plant medicine is so important. We tend to forget that all of the pharmaceutical drugs that we use today came from plants. That's where all of our medicine first came from. And so really going back and trusting in that plant medicine again and what it has to offer us. And I'll be getting into that quite a bit here towards the end of the presentation, but you can go on to the next slide. So I want you to take a look at here just a Western diet versus an Indigenous diet. And it's pretty easy to compare of why we're at where we are right now in our health disparities in Indian country, but it also comes to a lack of resources. So the Western diet, we have a huge emphasis on carbohydrates. And when you look at that diagram, you can see things that are turned into sugar. So we're talking about cereal. I think those are Pop-Tarts. I'm not quite sure. Different breads, muffins, all of those types of things. That's the biggest part of our calorie intake. Then we go into vegetables and fruit being equal, then protein and dairy. And I want to point out dairy here just for a moment. It's very common for Indigenous people to have issues around dairy. We don't have the digestive enzymes to break it down because it wasn't a part of our diet traditionally. Now, not all of us might have that, but it is very common. And if it's something where you're experiencing a lot of asthma or mucus or something like that in the body, that's telling you might have an intolerance to dairy. And then at the very top, we see sugar and refined foods. When we look over on the other side, and I gave you an example of an Anishinaabe traditional food pyramid, it is so vastly different when we're comparing the two. So at the bottom, you're going to see a much larger number of utilizing more protein, but we're talking about traditional meats. And when we're eating our traditional meats, those animals, they live their life off the land eating their traditional foods. They also didn't live a life full of anxiety. And so we're absorbing that energy. So that's just another thing that goes along with, it's important, that whole entire process of what we're putting into our bodies. And then it goes up into traditional grains and beans. The vegetables are a larger portion than the fruits. And then the smallest one at the top is more like honey, maple syrup, things like that. And then another thing that we don't look at that we don't do today is eating out of season and out of balance with Mother Nature. So that's something that all of our ancestors at one point had to do. They ate in balance with one nature. So in the winter, we ate more of our meats, we ate more of our starchier vegetables, and we had to keep weight on. And then when the spring came, we started eating more of those new leafy greens. We could do dandelion, we could use dandelions, we could utilize some of the bitterroot, the camas bulbs, things like that, because the land really provided everything that we needed at the time. But now that we live in this world of convenience, we're eating fruits and vegetables that are totally out of season, that have to come from South America, from Mexico, which really does impact the carbon imprint. But it's important to understand that once that food source is pulled from the earth, it's losing nutrients every single day. So if we can really support local, be food sovereign, and have that food within our communities, it's going to help so much more for the nutrition that we're getting and those it's going to be much more nutrient dense in those foods as well. Okay, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a part that you probably did not expect me to talk about, but I think it's so important because in order to really grasp the idea and the concept that food is medicine, we have to address the gut. If we do not really unpack what our relationship is to food, then really accessing and trying to incorporate traditional foods and the plant medicines can only make so much of an impact. So it's about getting to the root of what's going on in the body. And that's a very Western concept as we compartmentalize different parts of the body. If something's going on, like say with our hand or our wrist, we treat only that part. We treat the symptoms. We don't look at the root of what's going on, which is something our indigenous ancestors understood, is that it's all connected. So when I talk about the gut, we tend to forget that it actually has its own brain. It has a central nervous system. And when we are formed in the womb, it actually is developed before our brain is. And so it sends these chemical messages from the food that we're digesting to our brain, letting us know sometimes there's emotions that are related to these foods. Sometimes it's symptoms such as bloating, gas, indigestion, or it can surface. We might have rashes, you might have eczema. It can show up so many different ways. But what it's telling you is that something isn't working. And our gut is 70 to 80% of our immune system. So we truly are what we eat, and it impacts us at every level. So what's happened now in this culture, this westernized culture, is that we've learned to ignore those symptoms and those signals because we can take over-the-counter things like Rolaids, Tums. I know because I was a teenager and I had irritable bowel syndrome and I would just live off of Pepto-Bismol. So I know what it's like to ignore those symptoms. But that when that happens, that's when disease and chronic things start to happen in the body and inflammation. So little lesions in your intestinal lining start to form, and then partially undigested food and harmful bacteria leaks out, and then that inflammation travels throughout the body. So this is how it affects every person differently and why it's taken so long for us to grasp how important it is to listen to our gut. So if that inflammation travels to the joints, you're going to get symptoms like arthritis. If that inflammation travels to, let's say, your lungs, you might feel asthma or bronchitis type of symptoms. But this one, for me, is the most profound. If it travels to your brain, you are putting on what we call type 3 diabetes or early onset Alzheimer's and dementia. So what we eat does impact our brain, our memory, all of those things. And so that's why it's so important that we're utilizing our traditional foods and our plant medicine as prevention. So it's so integral to be putting that throughout, our childhood and throughout how we grow up so that we're able to maintain that health and vigor. So a few other things here I didn't mention. So this is just a few examples that I wanted to include on how that inflammation can show up in the body. And so we all tend to, like I say, we'll look at these different types of symptoms and think, oh, then I need to get a medication for that or treat it for this. But we so overlook what is actually going on in the diet and what is our relationship to that food, because if we don't understand what the relationship is, we're not going to be able to actually change the behavior. So our intestine is actually the most highly regenerative organ in the body, and it does repair itself every 5 to 7 days. But if it's always under chronic stress and it's always having a difficult time digesting, then it's going to start creating, like I said, that inflammation throughout the body. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So these might be some symptoms that you could be experiencing or someone around you that might let you know that something's going on with the gut, because it might not necessarily, you might not feel it in your gut, but there might be some other symptoms that persist and you want to know what's going on. And a big one for that is fatigue. So if you are having a hard time digesting your food, it's pretty taxing because it does take a lot of energy to digest your food in the first place. But I gave a few examples here before we start getting into some of the plant medicine, just so you could see just some of the ways that it relates to the body. Dandelion, for instance, is one of the most powerful plants you can use to help cleanse the liver and the kidneys. What's amazing about dandelion is it grows virtually everywhere, and you can get it throughout the season except in the winter. You most definitely don't want to gather dandelion around anything that's been sprayed with herbicides or pesticides, or animals might be, urinating on it and whatnot, or any type of congestion of any kind. But when you are gathering dandelions, and I have a slide for it coming up, you want to get the leaves when they're young. They get bitter, more and more bitter as they grow. But you can utilize the flower of the dandelion, but the medicinal part of the dandelion is in the root system. So it really does help act as a diuretic, and it helps clear out the liver and the kidneys as well. And what's really amazing is actually they've started making a lot of products out there that you can access that have dandelion in them, because it's a lot of work to actually process the roots yourself. And then there's just a few other examples that I wanted to include here of some things that we used to do, such as making poultices. So we could take, let's say, I don't think I have a picture of stinging nettle on here, but stinging nettle is also a plant that grows virtually everywhere. Pretty easy to identify by its sting, but it can be made into a poultice and applied to outside of an area where you might be having some type of pain. Not like a serious injury, but some type of muscular pain or arthritis. But these are the things that we used to utilize as far as plants, even just fasting. You notice that when animals are having a difficult time out in nature, even just our domesticated animals, they fast. It gives the body a chance to reset, and it's something that was a part of our culture. And sometimes it was definitely related around ceremony, but fasting with the correct protocol, mind you, because there's lots of ways to do it that are not healthy, really does allow the body to reset. We aren't meant to eat all day long and constantly making that gut work so hard. Okay, you can go on to the next slide. So here are a few of examples of some medicine plants. I already mentioned the dandelion tea, but here's just also some different ideas of way that you can incorporate it into your diet. One really fun way, I should have put it on here, is I made dandelion fritters, not super healthy, but I took the bulb of the flower, and then I made my own batter out of camas root and biscuit root. And then I actually deep fried it in some oil. It was pretty awesome. So that was kind of a fun way to utilize it. And then the greens I typically just include into a salad. And then what you see here on the far left is horsetail. So this plant is really easy to identify. It typically grows around bodies of water. I can find it near a river, near the ocean, near a stream. And I utilize the stem and all of the spindles, but not the roots. What's really great about horsetail is that it contains silica, so that helps repair your skin, your nails, and your hair. It also helps it grow, but it also contains collagen. So collagen is an incredible resource. It actually helps those holes that I was talking about that let that undigested harmful bacteria leak out and you get inflammation. Well, collagen will actually help seal those up and help calm down the inflammation. So horsetail is incredibly powerful for that. Before I forget, I also want to mention bone broth does the same thing, and why it's one of the things that I promote so much for people to start including into their diet right away, because that collagen that's pulled from those bones and the minerals that's pulled from those bones really, really helps combat inflammation. It helps with digestion. And for people that might be suffering from pretty chronic illness and they're not able to keep their food down, I make it for elders quite often. Bone broth is one of those superfoods that's really going to help sustain them. But horsetail really doesn't have much of a flavor to it. It's pretty mild. I typically make it into a tea, or I'll add it to my bone broth, and I just dry the entire plant. And in the middle, we have here some lamb's quarter, which is also known as wild spinach. It's incredibly high in calcium, phosphorus, and iron. I utilize it in salads, but it also can be boiled. So I wanted to just offer you a few different plants, and I have one on the next slide too, where you can access them just in your yard or somewhere close, because you don't have to go out searching for these plant medicines. You would be quite surprised that oftentimes you might have some ailments or someone close to you, and the plants are growing around you. They're just waiting for you to pay attention and to notice them. And we tend to overlook them as weeds and invasive. But if you actually studied them and looked into what they were used for, you would be, I mean, I'm honestly flabbergasted sometimes at what I look up, and I'm like, I can't believe that that's what I thought that plant was for, that I've thought it was invasive this whole time, but it actually was there to help. Was it there to help me or someone close to me? All right, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this is actually a handout that I also put together separately from the PowerPoint if you wanted to take a look at this with you. One of the easiest ways to incorporate the plant medicine is into tea form, especially for people that are just beginning. I already mentioned a few of these already, but the one on here, we don't actually have sumac berry in this area, but I wasn't sure how far everybody was coming from for the talk today. But lemon balm is also one of my favorite plants to work with because of the nice light flavor to it. It really does sweeten almost anything, but it also helps with a lot of women's issues, and it can be used as a poultice on the outside of the stomach when dealing with cramps. So just a few different ideas here. And I also wanted to mention before I go on, I want to acknowledge the comment that was made earlier just around some of the environmental stuff and pesticides. Like, we really don't understand the long-term effects of when pesticides are used on food, but we definitely do know that they're harmful. And that's why when I talk about these foraging practices, you have to be so diligent about what's being used in these environments that you're going to, because it will most definitely make you sick. And while I understand that sometimes we have to utilize certain methods, it's important to consider that Indigenous people are going out and foraging those traditional foods, and we shouldn't have to be concerned what's being sprayed on our plants. All right, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So these are just a few examples of some things that I've done with Indigenous foods. On the far right is my daughter. She's gathering, that's the first time she went out with me to gather camas, which was really fun and exciting. And that's really important. It really begins with starting them young and teaching them young. And it's never too late to start. And then on the middle, I incorporated, I did a camas and biscuit root base. And then the inside, I did a morel mushroom filling, and then fiddlehead ferns and some edible flowers and a medicinal tea. And then on the far left, it was a vegan cheesecake, and I used pine syrup that I made. If you've never made pine syrup, it's actually incredible. It's like the best tasting syrup I've ever had in my life. But this is about enjoying it. You know, this is meant to really restore that relationship in that we once had. And that begins with foraging or growing, or even just going out and resourcing local ingredients and then bringing them into your kitchen and working with your children so that they can start developing that relationship to food. As Indigenous people, we understand the concept that we pass on our intergenerational trauma. Well, we also pass on our relationship to food. So it's just as crucial to support our children in that way so that we can help them along their path as they continue to get older. All right, you can go on to the next slide. So I'm gonna do a call to action with everybody that's listening right now for you to take a look at these questions. And this is gonna help you begin that process of where you sit currently with your relationship to food, and are you using food as medicine? I always ask my clients, first of all, what foods did they eat growing up? Because that's obviously going to be where that pattern began. And do they have any strong emotions to those foods? Oftentimes we have a lot of strong, happy emotions, joyful emotions to foods that we grew up with. And if we were lucky enough to have access to our traditional foods, those are definitely there and connected. Depending on where you're from, what are your traditional foods? What was your parents' relationship to food? Again, because that's being passed on to you. And what time in my life did I feel the best? And when I ask that question, I do not mean what you weigh. I doesn't mean what pant size you wear. It has nothing to do with that. It is, when did you feel balanced in your relationships? When did you sleep well? That's what I mean by health. So taking a look at that and going back to maybe what you were eating or probably what you were doing at that time and why you felt your best. Those are really key things to look at if you're struggling with your relationship to food or something, or maybe one of those ailments that I might have mentioned, and then also maybe somebody close to you as well. So that just kind of starts the process. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I'm open to questions now.
Thank you so much. That is very interesting.
Thanks.
So we have here in the chat that they're thanking you, that it looks delicious, that they're looking forward to harvesting dandelions for salads. They didn't think of using the flower for tea, and they appreciate the suggestion. We have another one that my mom and I made dandelion leaf salad, but we harvested it late, so no wonder it was bitter.
Yeah.
And just a reminder too, is that this presentation along with the handout is available on the Hoover platform. It's under resources and documents, so you can download it. I was also going to include the link to Donell's website. So if you want to learn more or contact her directly, you can do so as well. Another person said, wonderful presentation, and now they're hungry.
Oh, good. I want to make you hungry, and I definitely, if I'm back another time, would love to actually bring some plants with me so that you can see them a little bit more up close and personal. But we're in the season where I'm not out gathering currently, so we're still in winter here. But
that is
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Another person said, my parents made dandelion salads too. Great presentation. Thank you and good job. And I love the springtime gathering our roots.
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right, thanks.
Thank you so much.